Okay, what's this weekend? Labor Day weekend, right? And, it's ironic that on a weekend that we call Labor Day, nobody works, right? We all take off of work. And it commemorates the labor movement that started way back in the late 19th century. In fact, it was first observed in 1894, I believe. And but we take the day off and we try to do as little labor as possible, don't we? It's a strange weekend. Nobody's wished me happy Labor Day. Nobody's given me a card. We don't buy gifts for each other. Somehow the gift card people and the retailers haven't figured out how to capitalize on Labor Day yet. For some people, it will be a busy weekend. For police officers, it will be busy because of the extra traffic and so forth. For us pastors, it can be a little frustrating because, sometimes people are doing other things on Labor Day weekend. And it's kind of the last hurrah of the summer, and people find things to do. But it also gives us the opportunity to talk about work. And so this morning, that's what I want to do. I want to talk about work. There's this struggle that goes on all the time between management and labor. And I suppose it's always been that way. Management wants more work for less pay, and the worker wants more pay for less work. And it's just kind of that dichotomy that's kind of been going on for a long time. And I suppose that's human nature. So Labor Day is all about commemorating a movement that started way back in the late 1800s, where the workers felt like they were being taken advantage of, and they started a movement to go against some businesses that were abusing some of the power that they had. Now, we could debate all day long whether the labor unions actually benefited the workers or not. My personal opinion is they were started for a good reason, but as they gained power, we saw what often happens with power. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And they wound up putting many of the workers they were trying to help out of work as their businesses moved to other states and even other countries. But I don't want to focus on that this morning. I want to focus on what God's Word has to say about work. If you'll take out your notes, my first point this morning is work was God's idea. Work was God's idea. Let's go all the way back to the creation, and we think about the creation. And God worked, it says, in that creation time, says, God spoke and things happened. He said, let there be light, and there was light. And then the second day, he said, let the waters separate, and they did. Day 3, he said, let there be dry land and sea, and it happened. Day 4, let the land produce vegetation. If you think about that, all the vegetation that we see, and God created all of that, that was a lot of work, and it was a lot of energy went into that. Day 5, he said, let there be lights in the sky, the sun, moon, and stars. And it was so. And if we're still learning about the universe, about the sun, moon, and stars, and it goes on and on and on, and into infinity, it seems like. And it's just amazing the amount of work that obviously went into that. And then day 6, he said, fish and creatures of the sea and the birds of the air. He created all that. And then he said, let us make man in our image. And he created man, male and female, he created them. And then he said, it was very good. But then, Genesis, it says, but the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. He rested from all his work. I've said God doesn't really get tired, so he didn't really need to rest. He was just doing that for an example for us. But as I think more about it, I think about God created us in his image, created us like him in a certain manner. We get tired, and I suppose God may have gotten tired. And he said, I'm gonna rest for a day. And so God rested. But my point is, work was God's idea. It was God's idea. Then in Genesis 2:15, it says, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. God put man in this perfect garden. Now think about this perfect environment. There were no bad plants. There was no death. There was no suffering. There was no nothing unpleasant. But there was still work to be done. Now, I don't know what kind of work that Adam needed to do. I suppose there was planting and harvesting and pruning and some things like that, just like there would be in any good garden. But my point is that even in that perfect environment, there was something for man to do. There was work for man to do in that perfect environment. Now, sometimes we think of work as being unpleasant. Why is that? Why is that? Well, that brings me to my second point, is that sin caused work to be unpleasant. It's not always unpleasant, but it can be unpleasant. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 17, this is just shortly after creation. This was after man had fallen. He said, because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. I was reminded of that this week as I was on the backside of our property. There's some wooded area, and a few years ago I had our friend Don come in and plant some trees for me. Well, I hadn't mowed that area for a while, and so I was back there this week and mowing around those trees and stuff, and there's a lot of volunteer trees that came up. And I noticed that the most prolific volunteer trees and bushes all had thorns on them. And so I got my trusty bush hog out, and we went to work on those things. And I was reminded of this verse. He says, thorns and thistles, you're going to have those throughout your life. I remember when I was a kid, probably the most unpleasant thing on the farm that I had to do was walk beans. I hated it. And I remember we'd walk beans, and for most chores on the farm I didn't get paid for, but for walking beans we got paid, us kids got paid like 25 cents an hour. It's like, wow, we were getting rich, right? But at least it was something. It was a little bit of incentive to go out there and walk beans. But my dad would always remind us of this verse, you know. This is because of the curse of man that we have these weeds out here, these thorns and thistles that we have. Because of the fallen state of the world, we're under a curse. And because of that, work can be unpleasant at times. Doesn't always have to be, but it can be. And I don't know how that translates into where you work, into what you do. I hope you find joy in your work. But sometimes we have to do some things that we don't have to do, or we don't like to do. And it's because of that sinful curse that was brought on way back there in the Garden of Eden. But here's my third point this morning. Work is honorable. Work is honorable. Ecclesiastes 5:18 says, this is what I have observed to be good, that it is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given them, for this is their lot. It says it's appropriate. It's appropriate to find satisfaction in your toilsome work. I hope you see your work as more than just putting in your time so you can get a paycheck at the end of the week, trading hours for dollars. That soon becomes very boring, very unmotivating, depressing, tiresome sometimes. Maybe some of you might find some satisfaction in your job title. You have a cool sign on your door or on your desk or on your name tag that gives you a title. Maybe you find satisfaction in that. As I think back over my life, I've done some crazy things to make a living in my life. There was one winter soon after we were married where my brother-in-law and I cut firewood all winter long. I mean, we were out in the snow and whatever. We were cutting firewood. I remember back in the 90s, I had a business hauling sawdust to horse stables, and one of my biggest customers was the fairgrounds in Springfield. So I'd haul sawdust in there for horse bedding. And then I noticed one day that they had these big piles of used sawdust. You all know what used sawdust is? There's some other stuff been put in it, right? And so I said something to them. I said, you guys need somebody to haul that off? And they offered to pay me to haul that stuff back to the farm. So I was hauling this horse manure, all right, back to the farm and getting paid to do it. And it was great. I got paid to go over and I got paid to come back, and then we'd take the manure, we'd compost it, and we'd spread it on the farm for fertilizer. It was a great thing, but I didn't see myself as a horse manure hauler, okay? I was providing a service for somebody, and they were happy, I was happy. I went home and took a shower, and then my wife was happy. All right? Everybody won. Everybody won that way. But some people would be like, oh, I wouldn't do that. Well, sometimes you got to do some things that you don't want to do. And but it was great. I actually enjoyed doing that, getting out and meeting people and stuff like that. Ecclesiastes 3:22 says, so I saw that there is nothing better for a person than to enjoy their work, because that is their lot. For who can bring them to see what will happen after them? I hope you find some joy and some satisfaction in your work. I'll never forget, several years ago, I had a conversation with a neighbor. He's a farmer, and he's older than I am. I think actually he's retired now. But he told me, he said, I've never worked a day in my life. I said, what? This guy, successful farmer. He says, I've never worked a day in my life. He said, when you enjoy what you do, it's not work. When you enjoy what you do, it's not work. He got up every morning and did what he loved to do. And, I enjoy what I do. I haven't used an alarm clock for years because I wake up in the morning, I'm ready to get up, and I'm ready to go to work and ready to go to my office, and I enjoy studying the Word and crafting a sermon and doing all that stuff. And I don't need the alarm clock to get me out of bed. Some of you do, I understand that, but I haven't for a long time. But maybe if you don't enjoy your work, then maybe you need to ask yourself some questions. Maybe you need to evaluate yourself. Maybe there's just a couple things. Maybe you're doing what you're doing for the wrong reason. Maybe you see your work as just a way to make a buck and you don't see the value of what you are doing. Or maybe you see it as just putting in your time, trading hours for dollars, and you don't see what you're doing as a service to other people. I think that's important. Maybe your work and your abilities don't match. Sometimes people get kind of caught in a trap where they just feel like they're stuck in this certain job or this certain occupation, and it's not really what they want to do, but they just can't see themselves getting out of it. And it's kind of like trying to put a square peg into a round hole. It just doesn't really fit. Maybe you need to evaluate that and maybe look for something else to do, something that better fits your God-given abilities, because God gives us all certain abilities, doesn't he? He gives us all certain abilities. A couple more verses on work. 1 Thessalonians 4:11. And to make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, you should mind your own business and work with your hands, just as we told you. See, work is an honorable thing to do. Over and over in the Bible, there's many, many, many verses about work, about working in the Bible. And there's this one verse that was always my dad's favorite. When I didn't want to go do my chores, when I didn't want to do what I as a kid growing up, I always had to get up and go out and feed the pigs before I went to school and after I came home from school. And there was always chores to do around the farm. He always reminded me of this verse in 2 Thessalonians 3:10. The one who is unwilling to work shall not eat. And I like to eat, so I learned to work. And, work is a good thing. Work is a good thing. Here's my fourth thing this morning. Work diligently. Work diligently. The Webster's definition for diligent is steady, earnest, and energetic effort. Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. No matter what you're doing, do it to your best ability, as unto the Lord, as if you are doing it for God. You know, I see employees all the time grumbling and just giving half the effort that they could. Their attitude is, well, if the boss doesn't pay me more, I'm not going to put in more effort. That's backwards. If you put in more effort, the boss will notice you and he will pay you more. If he doesn't, go find another boss. It won't be hard to do if you're the type of person who will put in lots of effort. And do it with the attitude that God himself is expecting your work because he is. I want to share with you a few verses out of Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6, he's actually talking about giving, and he's talking about tithing and so forth, and talking about prayer as well. But I think the principle also applies to work. Matthew 6 verse 1 says, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." That last phrase I want you to hang on to this morning. Maybe you're going about your work and you think it's a thankless thing. Maybe you think, well, my spouse doesn't appreciate what I'm doing. My boss doesn't appreciate what I'm doing. Nobody's noticing what I'm doing. My coworkers don't appreciate all the extra effort that I'm putting into and all these things. Remember, you're not working for them ultimately. You're working for God. And the Bible promises that what you do in secret, what you do that nobody else notices, God still notices. He still sees it. So give it your best, even when no one notices, because God still notices. And he will reward you in ways that you cannot even imagine, in ways that you don't expect. Okay, here's my fifth point this morning. Jesus sets an example for us. He sets an example for us. Early on in Jesus' ministry, he had started traveling around Israel. He'd gone to several different places and he'd done some teaching. He had given the Sermon on the Mount. He had gone to different places and performed some miracles. He had just passed with the disciples across the Sea of Galilee, and the storm came up and he calmed the storm. Okay? After they crossed the Sea of Galilee, he came to this place. Remember the story about the guy who was possessed with demons. He was running around naked, possessed with demons. And Jesus came along and he commanded the demons to come out of him, and the demons asked to be put into the pigs. He put them into the pigs and they jumped over the cliff. Okay? So that had happened. And then there was Jairus' daughter. And Jairus' daughter had died. He raised her from the dead. All right? He did that. And then it says Jesus decides to go to his hometown. So Jesus goes to his hometown, and something very interesting happens in his hometown. I'm sure people were abuzz at what was going on. I'm sure people were talking about what Jesus had been doing all around the country, all around Israel. But it says Jesus went into the synagogue on the Sabbath, and he starts teaching them in the synagogue. And this is what it says in Mark 6:3. People said, "Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. What did they remember Jesus for? For his work. For his work. He was a carpenter. He grew up as a carpenter. That's what they remembered him for. What he did with his hands. See, in that way, Jesus was just like you and I. He was earning a living just like we do with his hands. He was a carpenter. And that's what the people knew him best for. We think about another guy that wrote most of the New Testament, Paul. Paul was known as a tent maker because wherever he went, he made tents, and he earned a living supporting his ministry by making tents. Now this morning, you may be known as a carpenter. You may be known as a truck driver or a farmer or a garage door builder or a nurse or a teacher or a mom or whatever it is, whatever society wants to label you with. But like Jesus, I hope you realize there's a bigger calling on your life than what you do for a living. There's a bigger calling on your life than what you do Monday through Friday as you go to work. Remember the story of Jesus as a young boy when he was in the temple. His parents had come and they had gone to celebrate the Passover in Jerusalem at the temple, and then when they left with a whole group of people, and they're going back to Nazareth. And they get out of town a little ways, and all of a sudden they're like, where's Jesus? Where's Jesus? And nobody could find him. So they turn around and they go back to the temple. And there they find Jesus in the temple. Now this was Jesus who was probably in an apprentice program to be a carpenter, all right? That was his occupation, was to be a carpenter. He was learning carpentry from his father. But they go to Jesus in the temple and they say, Jesus, what are you doing? And he answered, he said, why did you seek me? Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business? See, Jesus understood, yes, he had work to do with his hands as a carpenter. But even as a young boy, he knew that there was a higher calling on his life as well. Which brings me to my last point this morning. Only kingdom work lasts forever. Only kingdom work lasts forever. I want to help us kind of keep things in perspective this morning, because sometimes we get so wrapped up with our daily work. We get so wrapped up in our work that we earn a living with, that we earn money for food and housing and cars and all that kind of stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes we get things out of balance, we get things out of perspective. And I want us to get that in proper perspective this morning, because only kingdom work lasts forever. Matthew 6:19 says, don't store up treasures here on earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. You know, as I get older, I become more aware of just how short and fleeting life really is. Just Friday evening, Goldie's cousin was killed in an accident, 50 years old, and was not expecting that, I'm sure, but just like that, her life was snuffed out. Life is fleeting. The Bible says it's like a vapor. It's here and gone. It's here and gone. Psalm says, for all can see that the wise die, and the foolish and the senseless also perish, leaving their wealth to others. Why do we work so hard? What's the point? We work and amass all this wealth and only to give it away to someone who didn't earn it. What's the point? He says, lay up for yourself treasures in heaven where moth and rust don't corrupt. Proverbs 3:9 says, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. What is the first fruits? We talk about tithing sometimes, taking the first fruit, the first 10%, and giving it to God. I think that helps us. The reason God instituted that principle was it helps us keep things in perspective, to keep things in the proper perspective. It's okay to work hard, it's okay to make money, it's okay to do all these things, but do we have the right attitude toward it? Do we have the right perspective for it? Or are we caught up with greed and with maybe miserliness? And there's all kinds of traps that can fall in along the way. But building up your treasure in heaven is investing in the kingdom. And whether it's the work that we do with our hands, whether it's volunteering in the church and kids' church teachers, volunteers in other areas in the church, the impact of that will last forever. Or whether it's giving. And I got to tell you, you guys have been so generous. It just blows my mind sometimes when I think about what has happened in Nicaragua. Menno just sent me a bunch of pictures again last night of the things that are going on in Nicaragua. In fact, go back and you think about what's been invested there. And over the last, 8 or 9 years, with the money we've sent down for buildings and the airline tickets bought and the money you've put out for sponsoring kids and all that, there's probably been hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in Nicaragua. Has it been worth it? Well, I don't know, but now there's 1,000 kids, over 1,000 kids that are coming to those 3 projects who are hearing the Word of God every day. There's, I think, 17 or 18 kids in a class for baptism right now. One of those kids is one of the little boys that we sponsor. A few years ago, the other little boy, his mother started coming to church, and she got baptized. See, that's kingdom investment. That's kingdom investment that will go on and it will reap benefits generations and generations down the road. That's laying up for yourselves treasures in heaven. It's hard to measure that, but it's going to give tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold down the road, I'm sure. So let's keep our work in proper perspective. Why do we work? Why do we work? Well, we work so we can put food on the table, so we can keep a roof over our heads, so we can drive a nice car, so we can save money for retirement. Nothing wrong with any of that. But let's make sure we're also investing in the kingdom. Investing in the kingdom. Keeping things in proper perspective. Now, one of the ways you can do that, in a couple of weeks, September 18th, we're having what we call Back to Church Sunday. We've been doing this every year. It's kind of a national thing. Because after summer, people kind of sometimes get a little bit lazy about coming to church. The kids are in all kinds of activities. People are traveling, going on vacation, and so forth. And a lot of times in the fall, sometimes people just need a little bit of encouragement to get back to church. So we're offering you a few tools to do that. I had some here somewhere. But out on the information counter, there's some postcards and there's some invite cards. Pick some up, and you can send these postcards out to somebody that you think about. Be praying about this over the next few weeks. And you think about somebody, just drop them a postcard. See somebody, hand them a card. Say, hey, you're welcome to come to church Sunday. Come check us out. The postcard just says this. Everyone has issues in their life. Stress, pain, debt, loneliness. Wouldn't it be great to have someone to lean on? At Solid Rock Chapel, we're here for you and want to give your family hope and a brighter future. Here you will find real people striving for a better life, along with safe, fun children's classes and a focus on living with real purpose. Join us this Sunday and see what church has to offer for you. So you can just take that, drop it in the mail, and send that to people. And we've had people come to church because of these things. So you're welcome to do that. And that again, that's investing in the kingdom. Investing in the kingdom. Let's all stand for prayer this morning. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for work. We thank you that you've given us the ability to work with our hands, to earn money, to support our families, and all those things. Father, I want to thank you as well for all the people in this church who are so dedicated in investing in the kingdom. I want to thank you for that. And God, help us to always keep that in perspective, that our number one priority is an eternal priority, to invest in what you're doing. God, we just pray that you would keep everybody safe this holiday weekend, that people would, yes, have fun, enjoy their families, and then as we pray about people that we need to invite to church, I pray that you'd bring people to mind that really need you, that need a better place to plug into, a place that will love them and care for them and help us to be those kind of people that as people come through those doors, as newcomers come in, that we can love them and just share your love with them. God, we lift everyone here up to you today and bless each one. We just pray this in Jesus' name.